Name is Amy. My name is Amy Jandusa English. I'm the project director for energy partnerships here at the National Community Action Partnership. We are very pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. Next slide. We hope that we will see some or all of you at our annual convention taking place August 28th to the 30th in Seattle. You can register at the using the QR code that you see on your screen. We will also place into the chat a link to the registration. We do anticipate having a total of 10 DOE funded workshop sessions, as well as a pre-conference session with DOE weatherization staff. Next slide. I would like to invite everyone to join in reciting the promise of community action. You can come off mic and say it with me or just follow along. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help each other and themselves. Next slide. So I'm very pleased to introduce today Derek Schrader. He's the Training and Technical Assistance Program Manager at the U.S. Department of Energy. Hopefully a familiar face for many of you. He's a longtime weatherization expert speaker, and he's going to go over information about the use of priority lists. So I'll turn it over to Derek to get us started. And I ask that you hold your question and answer to the end or use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen.
All right. Thank you, Amy. Welcome, everyone. Again, as Amy said, my name is Derek Schrader. I'm the program manager for training and technical assistance within the Department of Energy's Weatherization Assistance Program. I'm excited to have all of you join this webinar today so that we can have a conversation and a presentation on the regional optional priority list that the Department of Energy had released over the last couple of years. I hope for this to be a bit of an interactive session. Like I said, once we get through the slides, please, feel free to ask whatever questions that you have about the existing priority list. If you have like a success story of implementing the priority list, please feel free to come on, at the end of this to discuss that, as well as if you're having barriers implementing the priority list. We at DOE are extremely interested in understanding how the adoption of these have rolled out and where they're working. We'd like to celebrate that, and where they're not working, we'd like to understand that so that we can continue to make improvements to these. Next slide, please. So the items that we're going to go over today is just going to give a little bit of background on the priority lists themselves. We'll cover Weatherization Program Notice 22-8, which was the official release of the optional regional wet priority list. Going to touch on the priority list criteria, some of the key items to remember when you're implementing the priority list. Do want to discuss Memorandum 114, which provided some minor updates to the released priority list. Do want to talk about the benefits of the priority list, as well as some of the future priority list updates that we have in consideration. Next slide, please. All right, the first topic we're going to cover is the regional priority list. Next slide. So a big reason that the Department of Energy released regional priority lists was based on the feedback that we've heard directly from you, the network, from the states, from the locals, from contractors. For years, we've heard from the network that it would be beneficial if DOE would put together draft priority lists that the network could use, priority lists that the Department of Energy would do the maintenance and the upkeep on. Through that feedback, it took us several years to do, but we were able to put together these. And from what we're hearing from the network is they're seeing some net positives of them so far. Some of the barriers that we were coming across or that were being communicated to us from the network is the dwelling characteristics. There's times that entering a home into an energy audit tool based on the dwelling characteristics, it would just be best if we had a priority list that we could do so. Like we know what measures would benefit this home, why do we need to run a site-specific electronic energy audit? It allows us to put together a good package of weatherization measures that have been determined to provide energy savings over many years. What are some of those highest energy savings benefits that we can provide to the low-income clients? How are we going to capture some of the climate and weather differences? Priority lists do change from across the entire network. As I've said many of times in presentations, weatherization in Maine is very different to weatherization in like Southern California. How can we use priority lists to help kind of tamper out some of those differences to make sure that we have a package that's able to be utilized? And as well as fuel cost differences. Those do vary quite a bit across the entire network, even in areas where there's natural gas. There's some areas of the country for natural gas that are paying only 70 cents a therm. Some areas are over $1 a therm. Electricity is another area. So how can we use a priority list to help normalize some of those increases and decreases in fuel pricing? And the priority list does help do that. So we have been listening and we continue to listen to the network to see how we can put together tools, resources that help benefit you and help remove barriers to weatherization. And we were happy to be able to roll out these priority lists for the network. Next slide, please. So on June 15th, 2022, the Department of Energy did release the regional optional priority list. We did provide priority lists for single-family site-built, manufactured homes, otherwise known as mobile homes, and low-rise multifamily projects. These priority lists give grantees the flexibility to mix and match these priority lists for their program based on climate differences within their service area. It's another tool in the energy auditor's tool bag to be able to apply to a home. Please note that DOE does want to make it known that if a priority list is adopted, and the home does meet the criteria, does not mean that the priority list must be used on that home. There is still flexibility of the experience of that energy auditor to be able to run a site-specific electronic energy audit if they believe that they could get a more comprehensive package or the right package, if you will, for that home. So there is still flexibility in place with adoption of these priority lists to use whatever tool that energy auditor has available to them. And with the priority list, it adds another tool to that tool bag. Next slide, please. So what is the adoption procedure for the priority list to be in place? I know that a lot of folks that are on the call do work at the local agency or the subgrantee. And unfortunately, there's not the ability for a local agency to receive approval to utilize these through the Department of Energy directly. This does have to come through the state office. So for those of you that are on the call that are at the local agency and do not have the optional priority list, and it seems like something that would be interesting to you, I would encourage you to talk to your state leadership or your state technical monitors to discuss the potential of implementing the priority list. It's a way to help streamline the energy auditing process to not have to run that electronic energy audit several times to find the package that fits. These priority lists do provide that preset package that you could apply to those homes that you know day in and day out have the ability to achieve cost savings by applying a priority list. But the adoption procedure to do so is a grantee or the state that desires to do so must provide a formal written request to their project officer of record. In that request, they need to identify which of the three, or if it's one, two, or all three of the priority lists, site-built single-family, manufactured housing, and low-rise multifamily, that they intend to utilize. And then the grantee also must update or provide written policies and procedures where the priority list will be implemented, because there is still the inspection requirement, the monitoring requirement, and just the general oversight that the state's going to have over the adoption of these priority lists, because there is site criteria for the use of these that need to be adhered to. If a state adopts the priority list as drafted, DOE will reevaluate the optional priority list on a regular basis, meaning DOE is responsible for the updates to the information that goes in behind the scenes in the development of it. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. If updates are necessary, DOE will release the updated priority list via program memorandum, which we're going to talk about later as well, as we have already updated them one time. Next slide, please. So let's dig into each individual priority list. Let's start with the single family site-built dwelling. So this priority list applies to any wood frame single family site-built dwelling unit that meets the following checklists. That home can be no more than 3 stories in height above grade. The primary heating system is not a sealed combustion natural gas furnace originally rated for greater than 90%, or a heat pump that has been manufactured after 2006. And what these two items mean is that the existing home itself does not already have this mechanics included with it. And number 3 is that the job will not exceed $500 in incidental repairs, meeting the definition outlined in WAP Weatherization Program Notice 19-5. Now, some questions that we do get on this is, are you able to braid leveraged funding on homes with the use of the DOE priority list? And the answer to that is yes. So in regard to the incidental repair, if you have leveraged funding sourcing that you can put towards that incidental repair that will address the above and beyond $500 mark, then that is still able to move forward. It's just the DOE maximum amount to the incidental repair cannot exceed $500. The average cost per unit expenditure for the homes that receive the priority list, there is no actual cap on the job itself. There's some measures that do have a cap, example being refrigerators, those do have a cap in place. And some other cost measures do have caps in place. But the overall job itself for shell measures, those types of things do not. What matters is that the average cost per unit on its whole for the state is kept within the allowable amount. So this does provide you a little bit of flexibility and relief from some of the inflationary costs that the network is struggling to deal with right now when it comes to the cost effectiveness of the program. So we do hope that this flexibility in the average cost per unit, that each unit itself does not have a cost cap on it, but as long as you're keeping your average cost per unit in check by the end of the program year, does provide some relief to that. Next slide, please. So back one, please. Thank you. So the next priority list is for manufactured home. What is the criteria for that? So in order for the priority list to be considered for the manufactured home, that home itself must be manufactured prior to 2010, has an accessible unconditioned subspace, does not have an attached conditioned addition, and the primary heating system is not a natural gas furnace originally rated for greater than 80%. Similar to the site-built single family, the incidental repair measures will not exceed $500 with DOE funding. And the average cost per unit is the same on this manufactured home as it is the site-built single family. Now, I know that we do get questions too about there is some restrictions on these that does make the adoption of it a little bit difficult based on manufactured housing not being able to have a conditioned addition, that it was manufactured before 2010, and that the gas furnace itself is not originally rated for greater than 80%. Please know that in the updated priority list that we're currently working on, we are hoping that we are able to eliminate many of these restrictions and open it up to an even greater subset of manufactured homes, site-built single family and low-rise multifamily. Next slide, please. Low-rise multifamily structure. This is the one that I do want to draw some attention to because multifamily weatherization, we're seeing an uptick of it, an increase of interest in completing multifamily weatherization, whether it be with annual funding or bipartisan infrastructure law funding. The things to keep in mind with the adoption of this is the dwelling itself or the building itself must be 5 or more dwelling units per building. It can be no more than 3 stories above grade in height. The incidental repair measure cost as defined in 19-5 funded with DOE funds will not exceed 10% of the project's total energy conservation measure package. and the average cost per unit is still the same, where there is no cap, as long as the average cost per unit on its whole is being kept in check over the award itself. One thing that I really want to highlight here is the unit count. So it's 5 or more dwelling units per building. There's not a unit cap on the high end of the side. As long as this structure is 3 stories or less, and the incidental repair measures fall into place as where they are, you could potentially use this low-rise multifamily priority list for 30, 40, 50, 70, 80 unit dwellings. It does provide an avenue for grantees to consider implementing multifamily weatherization where it's not in place already. The use of the priority list does eliminate the need for that site-built single or that electronic energy audit, and might help streamline or at least get your foot in the door of increasing the multifamily weatherization that is offered in your service territory. One thing that DOE is considering and looking at in future updates is looking at a large multifamily priority list that would cover dwellings that are greater than 3 stories above in grade height. More to come on that as we continue to look at all available opportunities. Next slide, please. So key items to remember with the adoption and implementation of these. There is the requirement to install all health and safety measures per the grantee's approved plan. Any measures listed as mandatory may only be skipped if it's physically impossible to install. An example of that, there is like a small attic that you don't have the ability to get into because of space restrictions. That is an opportunity to do so. If the measure is already completed, you're unable to install wall insulation if the walls are already insulated. Those are the times that mandatory measures are able to be skipped. While implementing this, if you come across an instance where you believe that there's a reason or a justifiable reason to skip a measure, and it's not like very clear that you believe that you could, we would encourage you to submit that to the state to then submit to DOE for potential review and approval, so that we could just make sure that we're all in agreement that it's okay to skip that. As long as you have good documentation and a justified reason, it's very easy for us to review and provide approval to those types of items. Optional measures that are listed on the priority list may only be installed if all other applicable measures are installed as well. And what that means is, as you're going through, as long as the mandatory measures that are able to be installed are installed, you are then able to move on to the optional measures. And if it's determined that the dwelling either does not meet the description or additional measures are needed, a site-specific energy audit will then be completed. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, is like, if it doesn't meet the key criteria, you're going to have to run a site-specific energy audit on it, or an electronic energy audit. But if you believe that additional measures are needed, or a more comprehensive package of measures could be added by running a site-specific energy audit, by all means, the energy auditor should feel empowered to be able to make that decision, to be able to do so. If the energy auditor runs a site-specific or an electronic energy audit and finds that that electronic energy audit is not giving a more comprehensive set of measures, at that time, you're not then required to use the generated measures from that electronic energy audit. You could then revert back to using the priority list. So it's really giving you as many options as possible. And additionally, each dwelling type has an optional checklist to assist policy and procedures for implementation. And what this is for grantees that have either historically not utilized a priority list, or perhaps is looking to increase multifamily into the fold of their weatherization. DOE has developed these optional checklists to inform and provide some examples of policies and procedures that could then be tailored to the state and the local network for those policies and procedures to be submitted to DOE. It's not required that you utilize those. It's not required that they are used as designed, but at a minimum, if they help as a foundation, that was our goal in developing those optional checklists. Next slide, please. So another thing that I want to highlight is we do get a lot of questions about uh, pretty particularly down like in the southeast or in the predominantly cooling states is we hear from the network that getting air conditioning systems to cost out through electronic energy audits is often very difficult. So what we want to highlight on these is the fact that all three priority lists do included. So on the site-built single-family homes, here are the examples of where air conditioning is able to be installed or heating and cooling equipment is able to be installed. Example is you can replace existing ducted electric resistance forced air furnace and air conditioning combination with a heat pump. It even goes so far as in the third example of being able to replace existing window air conditioning manufactured before 2014 with a minimum of 12 SEER or higher unit of the same or lesser BTU. So really want to highlight this, like where you're struggling to get air conditioning to come in as an energy conservation measure, and it's not a direct health and safety item where you could use for without a priority list. Maybe considering using these priority lists might help you increase the ability to install air conditioning systems in homes, because as important as heat is in the predominantly heating climate, the cooling climate is extremely important to make sure that we're keeping the low-income clients safe, because lack of cooling is very much an issue, a health and safety issue, as well as an energy conservation issue. And we hope that this helps address some of that. Next slide, please. This is just another example for manufactured homes of where heating and cooling equipment is an option as part of the priority list, where you're able to replace existing window air conditioning units with newer units, or if the home has any other existing combination of heating and cooling systems, that you do have opportunities to install these with the priority list. Next slide, please. And then finally, with the low-rise multifamily, again, just pointing out all of the potential opportunities to install heating and, more importantly, like cooling equipment through the use of the low-rise multifamily priority list. Next slide, please. So earlier I had said that when DOE manages, or if the adoption of this by the state is the priority list in its original form, DOE is then responsible for performing any updates to this. On September 8th of 2023, DOE did issue an update, and those of you that are utilizing the priority list should be utilizing the updated ones. What was updated in that was to match the updated SEER requirements, and that's what the XXX2 values stands for. Is there has been updated efficiency requirements, and the priority lists now do require that the systems being installed meet those new energy efficiency requirements. It does help clarify as well that anytime that there is a HVAC, heating, cooling, air conditioning system that's being installed, that there must be a programmable thermostat installed if there's not one that's already in place, as well as that the standard work specifications already required that newly installed thermostats be programmable, but it was not clear in the original priority list that we put out. The timing of this was that they were to be implemented by October 1st, 2023. I would encourage you to just check with the priority list that you have in place. Make sure that you are utilizing the updated priority list. If not, please contact your state leadership and just ask them about getting the updated priority list in place. Next slide, please. So this is a list of the states to date that have adopted the priority list. I do want to add, I did note right before the session, there is one state that is missing here, and that is the state of Idaho. But we are starting to see more and more interest from states in adopting. So what this list does is it shows you which grantee and what of the list have been adopted. So for example, in California, California has adopted all three priority lists. If you go down to Virginia, Virginia has adopted just the low-rise multifamily priority list. And there's no problem with adopting 1, 2, or 3. Again, like these were put together so that it can be a mix and match. If a state believes that they could benefit from all three, they can adopt all three. If there's one area that they want to focus in on, example being low-rise multifamily, the state is absolutely able to do that. So if you're not on this list, or if you're not seeing your name on this list as a state, I would encourage you to have those conversations to see like how could these priority lists benefit you. Maybe there's a reason that it wouldn't benefit, which is absolutely, there's no problem with that. But again, it's always been our intention to make these optional as just another resource for the network. Next slide, please. So what are the overarching benefit of the regional priority list? It establishes a broad package of already approved reviewed measures. DOE has gone through the effort to ensure that the measures that are being installed have demonstrated a cost effectiveness that we do not need to run a site-specific energy audit every single time on those dwellings. It minimizes point-in-time cost fluctuations by taking the average cost of materials, labor, and energy source that results in more measures being installed and more consistently across the region. As I was saying earlier, inflationary costs have absolutely become an issue for maintaining savings to investment ratio. It's cutting into average cost per units. By the use of the priority list, it does help level that out to some degree. It does not solve the issue by any means at all, but not having to run that individual energy audit on that dwelling and having the ability to use a priority list that does not have an overarching cost cap does help in this moment in time deal with those cost fluctuations. It does help streamline implementation. It saves time by not having the energy auditor run multiple runs of an electronic energy audit on a single dwelling to find the most comprehensive package. It also provides more opportunity to weatherize more dwellings. And the prime example of that is the low-rise multifamily priority list. Adoption of that does open up quite a few more dwelling units to be weatherized, and perhaps even just that dwelling type into the fold of the weatherization that is happening, where DOE funds perhaps may have not been used on that dwelling type before. Next slide. So DOE is currently engaged with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and our technical support contractor, Simonson Management Services, known as SMS. And this update, as we work through it, is going to be a significant update. And the main reason that it's going to be a significant update is we are expanding the data set underneath the development of these priority lists by multiple fold. The original priority lists, which are very sound and were developed, with the grantees and the sub-grantees at the forefront of their mind to try to get as many measures as possible, we were limited on the amount of runs that we could do. By engaging with the national laboratories, we're able to increase that data set by thousands and thousands and thousands of homes. We hope to be able to put in multiple variations of types of site-built single-family or manufactured housing so that we can remove some of those specifications or key criteria where perhaps, the manufactured housing, it's okay if it has an addition, or it doesn't matter what year the manufactured home was built, or we can maybe eliminate the greater than 80% existing heating system. Same goes for the low-rise multifamily. Perhaps we're able to increase some of the the stories that are in place of that. Or for the site-built single family, maybe we can go greater than 3 stories. And our hope is that it increases the measures that are offered. A common feedback that we hear about the manufactured housing is that floor insulation, or otherwise known as belly insulation, was not called up for. And that's based on the audit runs that we did, based on the data set that we had available to us. It did not show up enough times for us to be able to put it into the manufactured housing priority list. By increasing our data set by thousands, we hope that we will see floor insulation show up. I'm feeling confident that it'll show up in there. So we're really trying to make these priority lists more all-inclusive to be able to incorporate almost any and all dwelling types that we approach and weatherize in the Weatherization Assistance Program. So what are some of the other things that we're doing? NREL is also going to be refining the climate zones in related metro areas, which will be vetted by Oak Ridge, DOE, SMS, and other stakeholders. What this is doing is bringing in additional climate zones. The original release of these, it was requested that we try to keep them as simplified as possible. And with that, individual states were given a single climate zone. And I know from feedback that we've received, especially in areas that have multiple climate zones, the regional priority lists that we put out don't necessarily fit that great for them because they have so many different climate zones. And the fear is that we're losing out on measures. I often use New Mexico as an example because the program manager there has given me the go ahead to use them as an example of this, is they really have like all of the climate zones. So in the areas that are more mountainous, they are not able to use the very cold climate zone because of the way that we tried to simplify them. The updated lists are going to have a lot more options to be more specific climate-wise to the areas that you serve. I talked about the identification of building samples. This next section is really talking about how we're going to increase the data set of housing characteristics. We're going to look for a statistically representative number of building models so that we can grab from various metro areas that then in hopes increases the measures that are available, increases the type of dwellings that we're able to serve. Next slide. Thank you. Building and model runs. This is going to be a collaborative effort as well between the laboratories in DOE and SMS. So the process that we plan on utilizing is that SMS will generate models and audit runs for each metro area and incorporating the specific cost library data in the updated version of Weatherization Assistant. NREL is going to generate a similar data set of modeling outputs using ResStock. ResStock is a modeling software, a modeling system that belongs to NREL that has building characteristics across the entire United States. So where we may be lacking data on buildings, we're going to be able to fulfill some of that missing data with ResStock. As well as NREL and Oak Ridge are going to generate modeling output data sets known as the existing building data sets using ResStock, AutoBEM retrospectively. So you can see it's like an all hands approach where we're going to be using multiple data sets, including weatherized data or data from weatherized homes to increase how these priority lists are put together. Next slide, please. How are we going to handle retrofit costs? So DOE is going to be requesting a representative of cost libraries. Some of you that are on this at the state level may have seen recent requests that have come out. We've reached out to quite a few states to request if they would be willing to share their cost libraries with the Department of Energy so that we can have more accurate information on actual costs when it comes to weatherizing dwellings. We've been able to obtain quite a few data sets. Thank you to those states that are on here that have shared those data sets. It's certainly going to help us increase the accuracy and the quality of these priority lists. And then as well as we're going to be looking at weighting the results. NREL is going to be defining weighting factors for the analysis for the cost effectiveness for each metro area, as well as we're going to be putting together analysis workbooks that applies the appropriate weights to the measures, the SIRs that are going into the development of these updated priority lists. Next slide, please. So then we're going to have to vet these, the updated lists. So we'll be using the original list as kind of like the foundation in comparison to the new list, as well as in comparison to audit runs that are done in ResStock, which is a NREL energy audit tool, and AutoBEM, which is an Oak Ridge energy audit tool. So we're going to look at the differences between weatherization assistant, ResDoc, AutoBEM, run all of these different models and scenarios to ensure that when we release these priority lists, that they're defensible and that they are valuable to the network themselves. Oak Ridge will then parse the results from Weatherization Assistant version 10, translate the data to the analysis workbook that's created by NREL, which will then be submitted to SMS. And SMS, who is our technical support contractor, will be at the end of this, the one that it will be putting together the priority lists themselves for future release. Next slide, please.
Hey, Derek, there is a question that came in through the Q&A.
Please.
Angie Jaco, you may want to come on and elaborate on this, but she's asking for mountain and rural territory. Are there more addresses?
Yeah, no, I can cover this one.
Okay.
Yes, the short answer to it is yes. We are going to be using weather data, and as well as that's why we're trying to get as many cost libraries as possible. Our hope for that was to get major metropolis cost data as well as rural cost data. But the expansion of the weather data is going to be more than just like large cities. We do have access to multiple rural weather data that's also going to be incorporated into this. Because your point's well noted, even in predominantly heating areas, as you get into more mountainous areas, it becomes even more cost effective to do measures because it's just a much more harsh and cold climate in the winter seasons. So short answer, yes, we are going to be trying to make sure that we're capturing rural areas as well as the metropolis areas. All right, so like the final three steps, and I had touched on this on the last slide, is that DOE/SMS will be then, once we take all of this data that has been compiled, all of the runs that have been compiled in the analysis, SMS will then create the priority list, potentially multiple more climate zones, which is our goal based upon the results. DOE, NREL, Oak Ridge will then review those priority lists and provide comments. This review will identify and expose any showstoppers that must be resolved to prior finalization. And a showstopper essentially is like, is there anything that is just glaringly obvious that should be included that's not included? As I said earlier, we've gotten a lot of feedback about manufactured housing not having floor insulation or known as belly insulation. And it is our hope and our goal. I mean, we have to, the data has to inform us that it is cost effective to include, but it is our hope and our goal that things that weren't part of original priority lists, because the data just was not showing the cost effectiveness based on the data set that we had, are now included. And then once finalized, DOE will then package up and release those updated priority lists to the network. So a timeline for this, we're really looking at potentially late 2024, most likely in 2025, when these updated priority lists are going to be rolled out. We're really taking a methodical approach to this to make sure that we're capturing the feedback that we've received to date from the network, as well as going over the data and making sure that these priority lists capture everything that need to be included. Next slide, please. So I know we have about 20 minutes left, which is about how much time I wanted to leave open for open questions and answers. And again, if you would like to share a success story in the implementation of priority lists, please feel free to either put in the chat or come off mute and do so. Or if there's barriers, I am as much interested in barriers as I am in success stories, because without knowing what those are or not hearing from the network, it's hard for us to make sure that we're incorporating those thoughts into these updates. So at this point in time, I would like to turn it over to the attendees to feel free to ask whatever questions or provide whatever statement, feedback, suggestion that they have.
Yeah, let me provide some facilitation here. So first, there's a question about the slides. I I forgot to say in the beginning that I'll email a PDF of the slides to everyone who registered today. So even if they're not in the room, if they're on our registration list, the slides will go out. And then if you use the raise hand function, I can cue you to talk. Because the webinar is being recorded, if you can come on camera or at least come off mute, I will have you speak, because then the conversation part goes into our YouTube
Mm.
channel and it's available for everybody. Angie Jaco, I'm going to cue you first.
Thank you. Um, I am a part of on the Weatherization Advisory Committee for the state of North Carolina. Can you offer maybe some suggestions or talking points to me about how to persuade or navigate to get the state of North Carolina to look at some of the
Yeah,
documents, please?
yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that will be helpful that we're going to be working on is, uh, and we don't have this data yet, so I apologize. I wish that we had it for this. It would be fantastic. Is we're going to do kind of like a quick analysis of those states that have adopted the priority list and what impact has that had on them. Uh, this analysis that we're going to do is not going to involve any type of data that needs to be submitted from states and or locals. But those states that have adopted the priority list, we want to take a look at what, if any, impact has it had with their average cost per unit? What, if any, impact has it had to the amount of units that they're able to complete in a year? Dial down to dwelling type, perhaps even fuel type. Do you want to flag that we are going to put in some type of calculation to take into account the rise of inflation? So, we'll kind of have like that level setting. But for now, some of the talking points that I think are beneficial in having that open conversation about consideration of the priority list is the time saved. You know, often on a home that would meet a priority list, I like to use the example of like when you go into a home, it's like a ranch home. It's We've all been in how many ranch homes that have been energy auditors, and you go in and you're running electronic energy audit to end up getting exactly what you pretty much knew was going to go into this home. So you've spent the time running the energy audit, several different variations of it, to end up with just what would typically be a standard package. By the use of the priority list, by doing that, you already have that preset package. So it doesn't necessarily save you time by doing the energy audit, like the actual data collection. You still have to do all the combustion safety. What it does save you time is when that auditor gets back to the shop, they know that they could use this priority list, and they already have a pretty much a work order that they can just apply to it and push that out and move on to the next energy audit. Now, I'm saying that I know there's much more paperwork that's involved with it than that, but it does save you time there. The other aspect of it is the cost of materials has really went up over the last couple of years. But and we've heard from the network how hard it is to get SIRs with the cost of materials. Given the fact that these priority lists do not have a cost cap itself, it does give you some flexibility to be able to do homes that may have not costed out. Now, when I say they don't have a cost cap, it doesn't mean that the local and or the state is not held to the average cost per unit. What it means is that that individual unit itself doesn't have a cost cap, but all of the units completed for the year still in your average cost per unit at the end of the year still has to come into check. Like those are probably two of the bigger things. And the other item that we've heard some positive on is like if you adopt the priority list as adopted, there is no administrative burden on the state itself in maintaining and updating those priority lists. DOE is holding that administrative burden to update and maintain those. So that alone too helps, because a state can develop their own priority list or use some variation of these optional priority lists. But if this priority list has changed at all, then the state is held responsible for any of the updating. So like I think those are the three biggest reasons that kind of like help point the needle towards maybe we should consider the priority list as another tool in the energy auditor's tool bag to be able to apply towards a home.
Thank you. And the reason I want to ask that question is because we are one little agency serving
Mhm.
4 Western North Carolina counties, and I'm telling you, the manpower
Yeah.
isn't here to run. I mean, we're all over the place. Plus, we have National Forest Service, with properties. So that's why I'm asking so many questions. And then, just real quick, are you going to be in Cherokee for the PAA conference again?
I am not, but we do have our technical project officer supervisor and the project officer for North Carolina will be in attendance and presenting at that conference.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Angie. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question? I see some comments in the chat. Aubrey Myers, would you like to ask a question out loud?
I guess I would like to ask a question of those that are here. Because we're still working through the updates. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aubrey.
Aubrey's joined us.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can.
Has DONE thought about, I don't know whether this is legally possible or not, but grant the sub-grantees the option of using a priority list. And I guess the simplest way to put it, skip the states, because, a lot of times the sub-grantees, they know what they need more so than the grantees know.
Yeah. So full transparency here. I don't necessarily see a path to that, but it doesn't mean that we cannot ask. And the reason I say that I don't see a path to it is regulations require that it's the state that holds the approval to the energy audit tool and or priority list. But that doesn't mean that we can't ask the question. So I don't want to set any expectations of, like this being a potential, but I will promise that we will at least ask, like, what that, like, we can ask the question is what we can do. But just want to set that foundation that statutorily and regulatory, I'm not seeing a path to be able to provide approval directly to a community action agency for use of a priority list.
Okay, thank you. Some agencies in other parts are like the lady from Western North Carolina, manpower is a problem, and a small agency has got one person, running 4 counties or something like that. And, if we had the priority list, it would be, make things a little bit simpler. I don't know how much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Aubrey. I would like to, if possible, because we're in the midst of updating the priority list, what suggestions do those that are in attendance today have that they would like for DOE to consider? Do you want to throw out there that the idea of putting together a large multifamily priority list is absolutely on the table? But what suggestions do those in attendance today have for DOE right now with the current update that we're doing?
I would add that ties into one of the comments in the chat because there was a question about for the states that aren't doing priority lists, what is the barrier to implementing them? So I think those two things are related.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kevin Glinke, I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, you nailed that. Well done. I guess, Derek, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
With you guys kind of being the boss, basically, on this priority list thing, and it sounds like you're on board or wanting to see things like floor insulation for a mobile home or manufactured homes be listed. And I understand you want the data to lead you, but like, since you guys are the top of the ladder, can't you kind of define what justifies it? Like the idea of insulation, like a proper thermal barrier with a proper pressure barrier accomplishes the goal. Like, couldn't you find some sort of other way to define the criteria to say like, yes, this is what we're going to do? Because if you're designing a priority list, you could design it in a way to say like, we're trying to do the right thing. Yes, we want there to be some cost effectiveness, but maybe we don't have to evaluate the cost effectiveness per measure, per housing type. We can define this is a cost effective principle that we can then apply, so that you're not trying to check every single box on every single level. You're the boss. You can take boxes away, right? Like you don't have to go that route, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And you know, I always feel bad when I have to tie back to this. Part of where we have to still fall in line is with regulation of the program, and the current regulation requires that all individual measures obtain a savings to investment ratio of 1.0 or higher. But to your point on that is like digging into the details of what it's stating for the development of the priority list. So, you know, I'm taking note of what you said. At the end of the day, I believe that like floor insulation is absolutely going to show up in the manufactured housing. I mean, I'd be surprised with the expansion of the data set that we have that we're going to, that we wouldn't see it show up. But you know, if it doesn't show up, that's one of those like those last check stops that we have is like, where's the showstoppers here? And what do we need? What do we need to do that falls within our allowability to try to make sure that as many of these comprehensive measures are installed as possible? So I know I didn't answer your question directly, but at the end of the day, we too still have to fall in line with what statute and regulations allow us to do. Um, you know, and that's not a policy decision, unfortunately.
And the statute requires that each measure is cost justified, even for a priority list?
Rule does, regulation does. Yeah, statute requires the program be cost effective. Regulation, so statute's law, and regulation is the rule for the program that requires each individual measure obtain a savings to investment ratio of 1 or higher.
Okay.
And then WPNs is program policy.
I got you. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Angie Jaco has another question.
I guess when we're talking about these priority lists, right now, North Carolina's in process of doing their program hearings for their annual assistance state plan, their technical assistance plan, health and safety and all of that. Would, I guess, adding the comment to the benefits of adopting the priority list or suggesting adopting this be a good, now would be a good time if they would.
Yeah. Yes, it would. One thing that I want to flag too is like the adoption of this doesn't have to necessarily land on a state plan approval cycle and or energy audit tool priority list approval cycle. It can be done midstream at any point in time. So there's an opportune time, obviously, to kind of like make sure that your voices are being heard of potential suggestions and ideas at the local network is to participate in the public hearings about the state plan, because then, you know, that's your opportunity to essentially go on record of, you know, where you believe that there'd be some program improvements, and maybe the adoption of a priority list could be a program improvement. But like outside of those cycles, at any point in time, a state can absolutely consider the adoption of not just the DOE regional priority list. If they wanted to develop their own, they could absolutely do so.
Okay, great. And then the other question is, and we're talking cost per unit averages a little bit ago. Has there been
Mhm.
any thought, I know, our HVAC HARP cost per unit has went up a little bit, but I'm just gonna put a plug in. That's really not enough.
Yeah.
Especially in the rural areas, because if my contractors have to go out and, get their equipment and stuff, it's
Mhm.
2 hours to anywhere from where we are, and I'm sure that the other rural agencies, see this too. I just to plug there, to be thinking about maybe for next year's or the following year's cycle for cost per unit averages.
Yeah, unfortunately, DOE doesn't have the ability to raise the average cost per unit. That's set in statute, which requires, it's part of the authorization of the program. Congress is the only entity that can increase the base average cost per unit. So it has to be written into the authorization of the program, which then becomes statute. Uh, that's where I think that, well, I mean, that's where we're engaging with NCAP. And I believe that we have folks from NASCASP on the call. So like if you're a state office, engaging with those entities is where sometimes action can show up as results. Like I said, unfortunately, DOE does not have the ability to make suggestions uh, to Congress on what to change about the state statute. That would be considered lobbying for the program that we work in.
So I guess that's an Amy at NCAP food for thought.
Yeah, we'd be happy to like follow up with you and schedule a call to talk through it some more. Thank you, Angie and Aubrey and our other speaker for speaking up. So we are close to the end of the hour. I'd like to invite anyone else who has a comment to come off mute and speak if you'd
Mhm.
like. We're happy to stick around for a few extra minutes, but if we're done, we can certainly close the webinar. And I'll just reiterate that I'll be circulating the slides as well as a link to the recording for everyone. So we'll have the recording on our website publicly available.
And I'll put in the chat too. So like, if if you think of a question afterwards, I would encourage you to reach out to Amy at NCAP and submit that question to her. And that's something that we could follow up on and try to provide a response back through NCAP.
For sure.
And I see we have one question that was put in at the end here. So are there any weatherization measures being looked at or in the works to be potentially be added to the single family not currently listed? Yes, there is like there's not what you don't see much for like foundation insulation, those types of things. We'd like to see an increase in opportunities for foundation insulation. We'd like to see an increase of HVAC systems, of allowable HVAC systems for installation. So we're trying to look at all of the potential measures that we can do in the weatherization assistance program and see where those measures increase where they're not currently listed on the priority lists that are issued right now.
So it's safe to say, Derek, that the priority list may continue to evolve.
Oh yeah, that's the plan on them. No different than if a state develops a priority list. We're held to the same rules and requirements that the states are. So because DOE developed this priority list, we too have to evaluate this at a minimum annually, where we're looking at costs, we're looking at all of the factors at play, and where we need to make adjustments to the priority list based on those costs. We have to do so because it's required by rule. So our goal is to continually evolve and improve the priority list to where we can to like I said, really just make them a more useful resource for the network.
And then if I understand some of the comments in the chat, there are states that have priority lists that also include or are applicable to dollars that are outside of DOE. Is
Yes.
that a true statement? So that's a whole nother dimension that could bear some discussion if we were to have a future conference session or a future webinar. So the
Mhm.
use of the priority lists is evolving and the dialogue continues, right?
It absolutely does. Yep.
Yeah. And
And I know,
I echo what you said in the chat. If you'd like to submit, if you have follow-up questions, definitely reach out to me, send me an email or go ahead, Derek.
yeah, and I just wanted to say, kind of like in closing here, thank you again for those that attended this. And we're always all ears, trying to hear how things are going in the implementation stage. So where there's areas that you see improvement, or there's areas that you see that it's working well, always feel free to like give us that feedback. Your feedback is what has caused change here at the federal level. Uh, the priority list is one of those prime examples. We've
Mhm.
heard it for years through the continuous improvement workshops or the ACSI surveys that have been completed. And we do make a concerted effort to take action where we can based on the feedback that we hear from states, locals, and contractors and training centers.
Yeah. Might be a good time, Derek, to close before we close to plug the upcoming DOE listening sessions. I can pull that and
Please do.
put it in the email that I send out to everybody. So DOE just, I think yesterday, is it true, Derek? DOE is hosting public weatherization listening sessions. And so that'll be in our newsletter next week. But I can also put that in the email that I send to everybody so that if you have specific things that you want to say about priority lists in particular, you can say them in that public forum, which is coming up. Do you happen to know the date, Derek?
I do, but I'm trying to pull it up right now. Sorry.
Well,
It
hopefully
is early
anybody
May.
anybody that's dialed into our webinar series and receiving our emails, you're not going to be able to get away from finding out about those listening sessions because they're going to be everywhere.
It is May 8th from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay. Do you have a registration link that you could drop in the chat for the folks that are here,
I
or
will,
should we do it
I
by
will
email?
do it by email, but I also will put into the chat where it is at. You can also register for it on our website.
Hmm.
We put it on the main landing page. So as soon as I get that up, I will put that link into the chat.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for participating today. We're 2 minutes over time, so I don't want to bend anyone else's ear. We'll close out the webinar, and within the next day or so, you'll get an email from me with the slides and the link to the recording. Thank you again, Derek, and thank you to everyone who spoke and all of our support staff. Have a good day.